So in today's video, we're going to be talking about 12 tips that you really need to know for the SAT. These tips can increase your score by 100, 200, maybe even 300 points. Um, these tips are just a compilation of things that I learned when I was studying for my SAT. Some of them are things that, other people have taught me. Some of them are things that I've, found through my own practice and studying for the SAT. And so these are tips that if you're trying to score anywhere above, 1400 and you're at a score at around, 1000 to maybe 1200 and you're looking for that major push, these tips might really help you. So we're going to start off with 4 tips just for preparing for the exam, and then we're going to talk about 4 tips for the English section and four tips for the math section. So if you guys are struggling on just the English or just the math, or you guys just want to learn about, how to properly prepare for the exam, this video is going to be really good for you guys. So tip number 1, you need to be consistent with every part of the practicing you're doing except for where you take the exam. So in my opinion, you should be taking the test early in the morning every time you practice. Most people are going to be sitting for the actual exam at 8 a.m. So my recommendation would be, if you're going to take a practice test, practice how you're going to play. Take that test at 8 a.m. But, it's not that easy for everyone. You might have work, you might have other things. So just try to make sure that you're consistent with when you're practicing. Also, make sure to take all of the tests in one sitting, especially if you struggle with the timing on the exam. I know it's not that big of an issue on the SAT now that it's digital, but still, if you struggle on timing for the SAT, you really should be taking every section together at once so that you can get used to that timing. Now, what you shouldn't be consistent with is where you take this test. Especially if this is your first time taking the exam, you're probably going to be taking the exam in a place that you've never been. I know for me, I didn't even take the exam in my own high school. So in my opinion, you should be taking the exam at different places. Even if you're going to, take the exam practices in your house, sit in a different area in your house every time you take the test. I used to sit in my house for the first, half of my testing, and I would try to move around. And then for the second half, I started going to a library, and I would be in a different room every time. This is going to get you used to being in a place that you're not familiar with, so that when you're sitting for the exam on exam day, you're not going to be anxious because you're in an area that you've never been. So tip number 2, you need to be strategic with the tests you take. So you cannot waste practice tests. Because the digital SAT is new, there aren't that many practice tests that are official from College Board that are available. There's 5, I think. There's 4 practice SATs and 1 practice PSAT. So when I was studying for my SAT, I had availability to about 50 practice tests because every single paper practice SAT was available. And so I could, I was taking a practice test every single day that I didn't have school. But now that's not something you can do. So you need to save your practice tests for after you've studied and are basically only a few weeks out from your exam. So if you want to practice taking tests and you don't want to be starting your practice tests a couple weeks out of the exam, you can buy the Princeton books, the Barron's books. I personally don't recommend those books. I think that they are more difficult than the actual exam because they're trying to scare you and get you to buy their courses. But if you go in with a mindset that these tests are going to be harder than the actual tests, and you don't let it, bog you down when you're getting a lower score than you anticipate, I think they can be helpful. Khan Academy for the digital SAT isn't that great, but those course challenges on Khan Academy can be pretty helpful. So I would recommend doing that. But what's important is that you try to save those 5 College Board practice tests to be the last tests you take. Now, on the other hand, you shouldn't wait until the last week of your exam to start practicing. It's not going to help you. You need to be practicing, consistently, maybe once, twice a week. Probably not more than twice a week because that's just too much. You're going to get bored. You're not going to, want to study. But it's important that you, space it out and you know what you're doing. Now, in my opinion, you should also track all of your practice test scores. If I can, I'm going to put up a screen recording I have in my notes app, I tracked every single practice test I took. I would track how many questions I got wrong in the reading section, the writing section, the math section, everything. I would track, were these errors because of silly mistakes? Did I actually not know what I was doing? And, you don't have to go that in depth, but it's important that you track it. I think that it's important for you to actually look at like the analytics of where you're going wrong. Maybe you're getting all of your questions wrong at the end of the first module on the reading, and you're like, okay, maybe I'm, losing focus, and that's what the issue is. And so it's important to, look at where you're going wrong and, actually fixing it, because that's the whole point of practicing, is that you want to get better. So the next tip is one that I tell every single person that I've ever tutored. Everyone says go to sleep early the night before the exam. You can't go to sleep early the night before the exam. First of all, if you're very anxious, which I assume you will be, it'll be very hard for you to go to sleep at 9 p.m., 10 p.m. So what I tell them is go to sleep early 2 nights before your exam. Nerves the night before the test might hinder your ability to fall asleep. So it's important that you're already going to be tired. If you go to sleep at 9 o'clock on the Thursday before your Saturday exam, all of Friday, you're going to be, feeling good. You're not going to be, tired. You're going to have a good day on Friday. And then Friday night, it's going to be 9 p.m. and you're going to be tired. You're not going to want to, stay up. And it's going to be easier for you to fall asleep, even though you will have those nerves. So people say, go to sleep early 1 night before. I say, go to sleep 2 nights before. Hell, go to sleep 3 nights before. But do not wait until the last night to try to go to sleep early. You will not be able to. It will not work. Now, if for some reason you have to do this, I recommend that you try to use some method of falling asleep quickly. If you just sit there in bed and try to fall asleep like it's a normal night, you will not be able to. I tried to do that the night before my exam. It didn't work. I sat there for about an hour. It was like 11 o'clock and I was like, all right, this is really bad. I was getting really nervous. Try, in my opinion, I would try to meditate. You can search up on YouTube guided meditation to fall asleep. But whatever works for you, try to get to sleep. So the next tip, this is one that I don't know where I learned this from, but this is probably one of the most helpful tips I've ever learned. I did not come up with this. I don't know where I learned it from, but this is probably one of the biggest tips when it comes to preparing for the exam. You need to read the news on the day of the exam. So when you're going into this SAT, right, this is a big factor in your college entrance and things like that. You want to be at your best, right? You don't want to go into that exam and sit down and you don't know, your brain is not ready. It's 8 a.m, you're tired and you are just not in the mood. So if you read the news on the day of the exam, it'll get your mind thinking before the exam starts. Now, don't read a book. If you like reading books, do not read a book. Do not read anything that interests you, anything that you will be thinking about after you read it. You want to read something that is so boring that you want to just stop reading it. You read it for 10 minutes. All that it is meant to do is to get your mind flowing. It is not meant to be interesting. You just need to get your mind flowing. Now, I understand a lot of you are going to have to drive yourself to the exam or, have to walk to the exam even. Try to do something that is going to get your mind going if you can't read the news. If you can listen to an audiobook, if you can talk to someone, even, just paying attention to the road and driving yourself there, I would say is enough. But you should really try to do something that's going to get your mind flowing. It's really going to help you, understand the test better. And this tip alone can literally increase your score by 50 points. I'm so serious. This is probably the best tip that you could ever get when it comes to preparing for the exam. So now let's talk about the English section. So in my opinion, the English section on the new exam is a joke. I think that if you're struggling with the English section, it should be really easy for you to increase your score. And it just takes practice. I think that the skill ceiling for this new digital English SAT is really, really low. I think that, it's not reading comprehension. You just have to find the answers in the passage. So these tips will hopefully help you guys. And yeah, so the first tip is going to be, you need to attack the question in the correct order. On the paper SAT, it just depended on the person how they wanted to attack the question. I would read the passages and then answer the questions, but there is a correct way to answer the questions on the new SAT. First, you want to read the question, okay? Because if you're about to read a single paragraph, you may as well know what you're reading for, right? It's not like you're reading a whole passage and you're about to answer 10 different questions on it. You're only answering one question. So you want to read the question, then you want to read the blurb if there is one. It'll just be that little thing at the top that says this is about an old man named Josh. He is the father of 2 girls, something like that. That can help you a little bit with understanding the passage. Usually you're not going to be asked a question about the blurb, but it'll help you understand what's going on. Then you need to read the whole paragraph with the intent to answer the question. Do not skim the paragraph and then like try to find the answer. You have like a minute to answer each of these questions. If you can't read the whole paragraph, then I understand, maybe try to skim, but 98% of you are going to be able to read the whole paragraph and still have time to answer the questions. So do not answer a reading comprehension question without reading the whole paragraph. So you can, get through the, fill in the word, or you could get through on the at the end of the exam the vocab, not the vocab, the like the transitions and the editing. You can get through that without reading the whole paragraph. But when it asks you like the main idea, or like what does this sentence mean in the passage, or like a data question, do not try to just answer the question without reading the passage. It's really important that you understand everything that's going on, and I'll explain why on the next tip, but it's really important that you read the whole paragraph. So you need to remember that unless you are told to infer or anything similar, like what does the author imply, like what might the author think, you need to find your answer in the paragraph. This is why you need to read the whole thing. So on the SAT, unless you're told to infer, you are never supposed to answer like the correct answer to a question is never an answer that was not actually in the passage. The answer needs to be explicitly stated unless they tell you to infer. And usually people will see an answer that makes sense based on the passage. Maybe it'll be about two friends, and like it says, what is the main idea? And it says like, it is about the fact that person A likes being friends with person B. Did it say that person A actually likes to be friends with person B? No, it's going to be a different answer. You need to find an answer that was explicitly stated in the passage. So this brings me into my next point. Again, this one, I'm certain I did not make this up. I'm pretty sure it was someone on YouTube that I learned this from. You need to understand every incorrect answer is wrong for a reason. So usually 2 out of 4 answers are obviously wrong and you can completely rule them out. But when you're between two, finding the incorrect answer is always easier. Like I said in the previous tip, if it is not explicitly stated in the passage and you're not told to infer, that answer is incorrect. It doesn't matter if it makes sense, it's incorrect. So if you can just go through the 2 answers that you're stuck on and be like, okay, which one of these is not even talked about in the passage, then you know which one is wrong. So it's really important. I know that you can't just cross it out with your pencil now because it's the digital SAT, but you can use the strike through option to, cancel out answers. I think it's really easy to find a wrong answer compared to trying to find the right answer. So you need to understand, look for the wrong answers. There are people that write this test for a living. If they had 2 correct answers on a question, like they would be done for it. They can't possibly do that. Every answer is wrong for a reason. Okay, you need to understand that. So if one part of the answer is wrong, like if just one word is off, the whole thing is wrong. Sometimes it'll be like the author thinks this because. If the author thinks that and that's true, but the because is wrong, the whole thing is wrong. The whole answer needs to be right. And they'll try to do that a lot. They'll make these long answers where like 2 of those answers, the first part is right or like the second part is right, but the other part is not. And so it's important that every single letter of that answer needs to be correct for you to pick that. So next, identifying connotations and tenses of a word. So this is one of the first things I learned when I was studying for the SAT because I don't read a lot and my grammar is not as good as people that read a lot. So on the SAT, when I would read a passage that I don't really understand some of the words, or I would have to, fill in the blank with a word and I don't know 3 out of those 4 words, it can get really difficult. So if you don't know the meaning of a word, you can usually, it's just a skill that us as humans have, you can usually try to identify if it's just positive, negative, or neutral, and that can help you, rule out some of the answers. So when you identify the connotation of what the connotation of the word you're about to put into the blanks needs to be, you can usually eliminate 1 to 2 answers like off the bat, even if you don't know what any of them mean. So additionally, like I said in the previous tip, if one part of the answer is wrong, it's all wrong. So for this, if a word in context is the correct word, but it's the incorrect tense or vice versa, it is completely wrong. So something that you guys might want to look at is here, you can see some prefixes. So sometimes you'll see words with prefixes that you recognize, but then the ending of the word, like you just don't know what this word is. Knowing what these prefixes mean can usually help you identify what the word that they're attached to might mean. So just knowing like, okay, like anti means like against, that's a negative connotation. Like for, before, that's just like before. It means, it's a neutral connotation. So understanding that can really help you on words that you might not understand. So finally, when you are doing the at the end of the section where it's like which the following conforms to English standards, you need to identify the subject that matches the verbs when it's verb tense questions. So I'm going to give you guys an example, but so in some of these sentences, they'll give you a sentence where the subject is not touching the verb. So instead of being like I went to the mall, it'll be like my friends and I with my dog went to the mall. So like you won't have the subject touching the verb, and sometimes that can be confusing. So when that happens, if you can just find the subject, what is doing the verb, you can omit the whole part in between the subject and the verb and just make it a short sentence. So another thing you can do, if you can't realize what the subject is, just look at the other verbs in the sentence and look at what tense they are, and usually that'll help. So let's look at this question. So in this question, we don't have to read the whole thing because it's a vocab, it's a grammar question. So we don't have to look at the whole question. So let's just start. The lock would increase the salinity of the lakes and blank a natural barrier. So we see, okay, well, this is like kind of difficult, right? So what we can do is we can say, okay, the lock is our subject. Okay, the lock is what's doing something. Okay, so we can cross out increase the salinity of the lakes. And let's just say the lock would blank. Okay, the lock would creates with an S, a natural barrier. That doesn't make sense. The lock would create a natural barrier. That makes sense. The lock would creating a natural barrier. Doesn't make sense. The lock would created a natural barrier. Doesn't make sense. So our answer has to be B. Now, let's look at the other way we can do this. If we say increase, we look at the words would and increase. Those are just like regular verbs. It's not increases, increasing, like any of that. Usually, we can just put whatever verb matches that, and that's going to be our answer. So we see increase here, we can put create here. That's like a last-ditch effort. What I would do usually is just pick what is the subject, cross everything else out, and then pick your verb. So now for the math section. This section has just been pushed into the ground. This section is a joke now because you're going to see here, there is literally 80% of these questions, you don't even have to lift a finger on them. So the first tip is a tip that I thought was obvious until I talked to a couple of people that I know that are still, studying and taking the SAT. People don't understand this about the new SAT, and that is you need to abuse Desmos, okay? You are given a calculator that can graph anything you give it, okay? It can solve systems of equations or any equation where you're asked the number of solutions, the roots, any of that. You can use Desmos on any question that has an X and Y. If a question says X and Y, you should already have Desmos opened. So even questions that don't have X and Y, and you guys will see an example in a bit, like you can use Desmos. It's so important that you learn how to use this. So like, let's take a look at this question, right? So this might not be the easiest question for you, right? You might not really know what you're doing. So what you can do is you can just take this equation, right? Plug it into Desmos. And then what you can do is you take all these answer choices and it says which expression is equivalent to this. So if an expression is equivalent to it, it's going to have the same graph, right? So you can just plug these in and just see, okay, which one has the same graph. So you plug all of them in and you see that this green line is the same as the red. And so you say, okay, the green line is 8x minus 3 over 2. So your answer has to be B. Like that requires no work. And while this might take a little more time than it would if you actually do know how to answer the question, this is a factor by grouping question. If you don't know what you're doing and there's some questions where you won't, Desmos can solve it for you. A computer will never get a question wrong unless you tell it something wrong. So it's better to just give it to Desmos and have it do something. Even me, someone that can get all these questions correct, at least I hope I can, I will put stuff into Desmos. I wouldn't risk it because you can make simple errors on this test. You're nervous, you're tired probably, and you've just sat through this whole English section. You can make mistakes. Desmos will not make mistakes. So just putting it into Desmos, even if it's a simple thing, if it's like, what is the y-intercept of like x squared minus 3? Like, just put it into Desmos. There's no reason that you should be doing that like on your paper. It's probably quicker to just do a question like that in Desmos. So our next tip is plug and chug. So most problems where you need to solve for x or a variable, you can just plug in numbers. The SAT loves to give questions like this, okay? If you don't have to do math, like I said, don't do it. The computer will not get the question wrong. If you can get a question wrong, if there's even a 1% chance that you're going to get a question wrong, why not just give it to a computer that will guaranteed get the question right? So something that's important is that you make sure that if you do plug in the numbers, the scenario that you're plugging in actually works. So for example, we look here. Questions like these, they love to give you this, where they'll give you an equation and then say like, okay, what is one of these variables equal to? So here it's asking us, what is x equal to? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say x equals 1, b equals 1, and y equals 77. You might ask, why did I pick that? That's so random. Y equals 77. Well, the scenario actually has to work. So if we look here, we would have 1 over 7 times 1, so 1 over 7, equals 11 times 1 over 77, which is going to simplify to 1 over 7. So again, it has to actually work out. So you can't just plug in 1, 2, and 3. It's not going to work. So we look here, and I'm just going to plug in all these equations, and I should get that this side equals that side. So this just on the top is me showing you that we're going to get 1 over 7 equals 1 over 7. So here we'll put x equals 1 on the left for all of them, and we just solve them, and we want to find one that equals 1. So we look up here, and we have 7by, so we're going to have 7 times 1 times 77 over 11, which is going to simplify to 7 over 7, which is 49. Clearly not going to be 1. For b, we have y minus 77b, so we have 77 minus 77 times 1, which is 0, not 1, so that's wrong. For c, we have 1 equals 77 over 77 times 1, so we're going to get 1, so that's our answer. And then finally, just to look at d, we would get x is 1 equals 77 times 1 times 77, which is 77 squared. So that's clearly wrong. All right, so the next tip is going to be, you need to realize that in the math section, the questions get harder as the modules progress. I'm not talking about module 2 is harder than module 1. I'm talking about just within a module, the questions get harder as it progresses. So in the beginning, question 1 through 10, you should be going pretty fast. A question like, if x plus 2 equals 6, what is x? They give you questions like that. You should be rolling through them. Really simple. You shouldn't be spending too much time on them. Now, you should be saving your time for, questions 15 plus, questions 20 plus, where the questions are actually going to be difficult. Now, what they'll do on a lot of these questions is it'll seem like an easy question, right? You'll read the question and be like, oh, this is really easy. I'm telling you, for most of these questions, and don't let this get in your head, but for most of these questions, if you think that like a question after question 20 or after question 15 is really easy, you're probably doing something wrong. Because even me, I can appreciate that these questions near the end of the module are hard, and sometimes they're really hard. So you should hopefully get the question right, but you should be like, oh yeah, that was pretty difficult. Other people might get this question wrong. So like, for example, we look at question 7 on one of these practice exams. X plus 40 equals 95. What is x? Like, that's ridiculous. You should get that in 2 seconds. The answer is 55. But then we look at a question like 21. I'm not going to answer this question here, but when I took a practice test for this exam, my first practice test, I actually got this question wrong. This was the one question I got wrong because I read this question and I was like, oh, this is so easy. And then I read into it, and after, I submitted the exam, and like I said, I like to go through my exam, see what I got wrong. I read it and I was like, wow, like they really like did that to me. Like, these questions can be more difficult than they look, and they do that on purpose. They want to weed out the kids that have studied and know what they're going to ask, as opposed to the kids that are just trying to wing it. Because if you're just trying to win the exam, you're going to get a question like this wrong. Okay, so you guys need to like take practice tests, know what you're doing, and understand that the module will get harder. So final point, do not memorize formulas. You do not need to memorize like any formulas for this exam. I'm going to give you guys a list of some that are helpful, but Like the only formulas that would even be helpful to know is the parent functions of quadratic equations and like the circle formula. Other than that, like there's literally nothing that you would need to know. So you also don't need to know any trig values. You have a calculator. You do not need to know what is cosine of 30, what is sine of 60. No need. Also, you have a formula sheet with every volume formula you'll ever need, so there's no point. So if you look here, this is the volume sheet you're going to be given. You don't need to memorize any of these formulas. You don't even need to remember the special right triangles. You're going to be given them. So here, I'm going to give you, this is a list of the only formulas that I would ever say are helpful, like even helpful. So you have your equation in vertex form, you have your quadratic equation in standard form. These two here, the sum of solution and product of solutions, these are really not that important because you can just use Desmos. If you're asked what is the sum of solutions to like this, you can just use Desmos and find the solutions and then add them or like multiply them. But there was one question I saw on a practice exam where you couldn't like you would really have to know Desmos really well to like get that question without knowing these two things. So it's kind of helpful, not really. I would know this for a circle. Just why not, you know? So also know point slope form. Not that important, but like you probably already know it. You're in algebra, and so you probably already know it. Also, degrees to radians. I would recommend like learning this and knowing this. They might ask you a question where like the write-up will be in radians and like the answers will be in degrees, and so you'll have to know how to change them. It's not really that difficult to remember these. Also, you may as well just remember SOHCAHTOA. It's not that hard. And while we're on this screen, I just want to note there is a mistake here. There shouldn't be a y minus k squared here, but so it should just be x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. Anyways, so don't go like crazy trying to memorize these formulas. You don't need to. And let's say you don't memorize any of these formulas, and there's a question where if you didn't know what the product of solutions equation was, you would get it wrong. That's one question. Okay, think about like how many people are wasting their time trying to memorize like sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. Like you just don't have to know that. It's just so like unimportant, and it's just a waste of your time. So like spend your time wisely. You probably have a lot of stuff going on in your life. You probably don't want to be spending time studying for this exam at all. Spend it doing things that are actually going to help you. So those are the 12 most important tips, in my opinion, that you need to know for the SAT. If you guys did enjoy, it would really help if you guys could like, subscribe, share it to any of your friends, and make sure that if you did like this video and you like this this style of video, make sure to leave a comment, and you can recommend types of videos you want to see. And yeah, so hopefully you guys enjoyed, and good luck on your studying for the SAT.